From the Spec Network, this is Fragmented, an Android developer podcast where we talk about building good software and becoming better developers. I'm Don Felker.
And I'm Kaushik Gopal.
Welcome to the show.
This episode of Fragmented is brought to you by educative.io. Now, there are a lot of websites out there that help you teach programming courses, but one thing most of them tend to do is focus on video, so they're all video-based. Educative.io takes a very different approach. To them, they go the text-based route. That means you don't necessarily have to scrub back and forth to follow along. Say, you're going through a video and someone just blows past a certain section, and then you're going back, wait, what did they say exactly? And you rewind, then open up a notepad to take notes. You don't have to do any of that with educative.io because it's text-based. Think of it as almost reading a book. If you're reading a book, it's pretty easy to skim back or double back and just easily skim through. In addition to a whole bunch of amazing courses out there, here's the kicker. If you're an Android developer, they just launched a killer Android course called Modern Android App Development. It's perfect. Just go back, refresh your memory, and go through the educative course. It has a fully functional live Android emulator, so you can actually create and deploy your app right from within the course. You'll get a live link to the app that you can share with friends or even, put up on your portfolio if you start looking for jobs. Check it out now and get an additional 10% off your purchase if you go through this special link, educative.io/fragmented. Once again, that's educative.io, educative, in case you didn't catch the spelling, educative.io/fragmented. Thanks again for sponsoring this show, Educative.
All right, so I didn't even want to I don't even want to do an intro. I'm literally starting right now. Because this whole world is just screwed right now. Everything is upside down. Everybody's having to work remotely.
So what's new with you, Don?
Holy cow.
Oh my God.
Everybody now sees what it's like to work remotely. This is forced.
That's one of the positive things that have come out of this whole thing, right? People are oh, you want to try remote? Yeah, we will force this down, whether you like it or not.
It is happening. Do it now. Yeah, so that's a good question that I'd like to have for you. So I've been remote for over a decade now. And I'm going to tell you right now, I had this discussion with a friend of mine, Will, the last couple of days ago, and I told him, I was like, dude, I have to kind of admit something to you. And he goes, well, what's that? And I said, dude, I feel kind of guilty. And he goes, why do you feel guilty? Because he works remotely too. And he goes, why do you feel guilty? And I said, well, dude, not much of my life feels different. And he just started, and he just kind of chuckles a little bit. He goes, dude, me either. He's like, I feel the same way. And so here's the thing is him and I have both worked remotely for, he's been 5 years. I think at least I've been over 10. And what I'm trying to say is I'm not dismissing the terrible crap that's going on in this world. But to me, there's been many months or even years where I have just worked at home. And I haven't left my house, and I have been self-quarantined before a quarantine went around or before a lockdown went around. And so to me, it was for example, the other day I went up to go barbecue. I started the barbecue in my backyard, and I was like, oh yeah, start the barbecue. And I'm like, oh, it's really quiet out. I don't hear any cars right now. I'm like, oh yeah, we're in the middle of a pandemic. And I'm like, and I kind of got the weird grimace face, ooh, God, this is terrible. And I feel guilty about that. And so it's kind of why I wanted to talk to you a little bit about today is to see what your experience was and kind of how I can, given my experience of what I've dealt with in the last 10 years, how maybe I can provide some value to some people with that experience to help them get through these times, because working remotely is not just working at home in your sweatpants. To be honest, it's a 100% mental game. And I want to see how you felt about it.
Oh my God, Don. the first thought that came to me when all this is, I was like, wow, so this is what Don's life is like 24/7.
Mm-hmm.
I will say this, the TLDR I feel is there are aspects that work really well that I feel this is like game changing, right? I've saved so much time on my commute.
Oh God.
My commute I live in the Bay Area. My commute is not that terrible. It isn't that bad at all. It's about 35 minutes, but it's so crazy because you don't necessarily allocate the amount of time it takes for you to get ready to leave, if you know what I'm saying, right? Because when you do the math in your head, typically you tend to say, okay, it's half an hour one way, so it's half an hour, 1 hour. Oh, I lose an hour a day. Not a big deal. I can listen to some podcasts. But it doesn't stop there. And it's so funny because I only realized this now that there is there's like getting ready to shower. I mean, I am obviously taking my regular showers now. So
I hope so.
All that is like... all that is going fine, but it's just the mental preparedness to actually go in. Like you enter the office, you say your highs, hellos to people like around you. You go, grab like a bottle of water. It's so funny how all those little things add up, and you actually land up losing quite some time, right?
Yeah.
So I've actually gained a lot of time, and it isn't like my productivity at work has gone down in any way. If anything, given like the whole thing, and like you said, I obviously want to acknowledge the fact that there is, like a pandemic going on, and a lot of people have a very difficult time. At work, it's been a little crazy for me because I work in Instacart, right? And like the grocery delivery has been going insane, goodness. Right? So work has actually gone like 2x for me, but I don't necessarily feel less productive having working from home. And that's why, I started this whole thing saying, I was like, wow, so this is how like Don feels. Like, this is the secret.
Yes. It's almost like a mini superpower, because I think you described what I've felt the last 10 plus years. I mean, very succinctly, is like, you don't anticipate the amount of time it takes to prepare. Like there's a routine that we all will go through when we go to our day-to-day jobs. It's like, all right, I got to wake up. I need to make sure I feed the dogs. If you have animals, I got to take a shower. I got to get ready. I get my lunch ready. I got to walk out the door. I got to make it to the train, the bus, to public transit, or I drive. And then I count my time. It's not that half an hour before. And when you work from home, and everyone's experiencing this now, it's like, oh, like, okay, well, now my office is right there. I can point to it. And I can literally hop out of bed and walk over and sit at my desk. That is a blessing and a curse all in the same sentence.
Absolutely. But like you said, I do have a couple of questions, because you've been doing this for some time. You're a pro at this, right? I am very new to this. For the better part of like almost my entire life, I've always been working I've never had like a work from home situation. I've always gone into work.
Yeah.
Obviously, I have a lot of flexibility. So if I do want to work from home on a few days, I would. But clearly that, I'm not geared up, or at least I wasn't before this, to work from home. So I have a lot of questions, not just in terms of like the setup, which I also do, like, in terms of like your setup, but also just like, the mental game thing you mentioned. That I think is like the biggest sort of change that I think most people will experience. And I had a couple of questions I wanted to ask around that.
Yeah, I mean, we can definitely hop right into it, because I feel that if you don't, here's the thing. It's really hard to separate work life from home life when they're both in the same physical area.
You said, we have our routines, and I want to clear, you still should have a routine, I'm guessing, right? Yeah. It's just that the routine changes. Because the first few days, when like this whole pandemic situation was going, and like half the time we didn't know what was going, I didn't really set it up. I was like, oh, well, I don't think it's wise to go in today, so I'll just like start working from home. I'll continue working from home. Yeah. And what I realized is day 4 or day 5, it got really tricky for me, because at that point, not having that sense of like routine or like that regularity. And it was really hard because I couldn't clearly understand what was wrong. Because I was like, I'm here, I'm working, my computer is on, I'm typing, I have the work, I know the work that I have to do. But what is it? It isn't that drive that I'm able to get. And can you tell me, like, how have you, man, like, what is your routine? Like, what do you do? Because you clearly do have a very explicit routine, right? You get up, you have your things to do in the morning, whether it's like your coffee routine or like your workout, your gym. Like, talk to me about that, because clearly I feel as that's something I've realized as I've tried to get into a better routine, things have improved, but I'm missing something. And I want to like understand what that is, what you have learned from this.
Yeah, for sure. So I'm going to preface this with kind of this long drawn out explanation I'm going to have with this. This pandemic has changed the face of everyone's work, even people that have worked from home for a long period of time like I have. This has even changed my way of working. And so a lot of people might think that, all right, well, Don or so-and-so that that works from home has got this figured out. Sort of. We have experience and we can lean on that experience, but it's even changed us. And let me explain why. For a lot of us who have children like I do, I have 2 small children that are in middle school and elementary school. They're not in school anymore. And so half the time they're with me, half the time they're with their mom. And when that happens, when they're with me, like there's homeschool, and or they call it virtual telecommuting, teleschool, whatever they call it. And so traditionally, prior to this happening, my schedule was kind of very regimented. I would wake up at 4:30 to 5 in the morning. I would work from, I'd kind of journal, meditate. I would work until 7:30 in the morning. I would go to the gym till about 9 or 10. Then I would work until 5 or 6. And then I'd just do regular family stuff at that point in time. And that was been my schedule for many years now. However, when this came around, everything kind of got flipped on its head because I couldn't work those normal hours anymore because half the time I'm schooling my children. And so for me, what I realized is like the discipline of time constraints and scheduling for me is what really mattered. And what I mean by that is like maybe I couldn't work from 9 to noon or 1 p.m. anymore. And the reason why is because my children were homeschooling that time. And for example, we do homeschooling from 8:30 in the morning to about 12:30, 1:30 in the afternoon. And that's usually when they're usually done within that time frame. And then they can kind of go outside or play on the iPad or whatever. So what I have learned to do is for me to be able to get in a full 8 hours of work, I now get up at 4 in the morning. I get up even earlier.
Oh, wow.
So I get up at 4 in the morning and then I work from 4 to about 7:30 when they get up. So I get about 3.5 hours of like really solid work done. And like it's undisturbed, highly focused, mega productive. And then I take for me, it's about scheduling, about being on the same routine. And you ask like, what's your routine? And so for me, and this can be different for everybody, like you got to find something that works for you. And you're going to have to adjust it. Like I'm realizing certain things are going to work and not work. For example, every day I try to take a shower at 8:00 in the morning. I might be in the middle of coding and my kids might be awake. We don't start school till 8:30. I got extra time, but I tell myself, Don, you got to take a shower at 8:30. The reason is because this is something that you can control. And in a situation like a pandemic like this, where you can't control if you go to your office, you can't control if you can go to the park or whatever, because these things are closed, you have to rely on certain things in your life that you can control. And so what are those things you control? I can control when I wake up. I can control when I take a shower. I can control when I start work. I can control when I stop work. I can control when I eat lunch and dinner and when I exercise. When you start exhibiting discipline around these particular areas of things that you can control, what that does is it gives you a mental mind shifts your mindset of like, all right, I can control these situations, so I am in kind of control. Anytime you've ever felt out of control, what does it give you? Like intense anxiety, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And so if there's anything you can control, you should. And in these situations, like in a pandemic like this, I like to use the 8:00 in the morning shower for me as an example. Like that's when I take a shower. I've never taken a shower at 8:00 in the morning my entire life. But it's just right now, that's the time that works for me.
There's just so many like valuable points that like, I want to like talk to you about there.
Go ahead.
The thing, like you mentioned the routine, right? It isn't like, you read like self-help books and you see a lot of this where you're like, the only control you have is over these small things, and that's important. Typically I would think, yeah, that makes sense, but it doesn't really apply to me because things are okay. And that's only because I fooled myself into thinking that most things were anyway under control, but they're not right now. For example, just the thing you mentioned, right, waking up and like taking an early shower. What happens now, like at least in the first week for me, was I used to wake up and I'm like, you know what, I don't have to go into work. Like my first meeting's only at 10 a.m.
Yeah.
Typically, if it wasn't the case, I would have to like, oh yeah, but it'll take me time to reach there. So I would like get started anyway, you know?
There was a forcing function, there was a forcing function there that forced you to get there.
Absolutely. And because that wasn't there, what would happen is on one day, I would wake up at like 8:30 because I was like, you know what? It's fine. My first meeting's at 10. Or even when I go to sleep, I would like, go to sleep a little extra late. And it isn't like I'm sitting on my ass and, like watching TV or something, although like I would really like that. But the idea of like, oh, you know what? I'm on this thing. I'm like coding this thing. I'm almost done with this bug. I'm going to push this branch. I'm going to be done with it. I'll feel great. I just have to put in one more hour. So I sit till 11, 12 and I may do it. But then the next day, again, you know what? I'm not able to get up early. And then it goes into this whole like sort of lull where I'm like, I'll wake up at 8:30, but I slept late. So it's okay. I can add like an additional half an hour. That just messed with my routine completely because I just felt
it compounds.
Yeah, exactly. There was no control, right? I would wake up and I'm like, I don't know. And that was the feeling like when I, prefaced this whole thing, there was something that just made me feel like I didn't have, my stuff together, for lack of a better word.
Yeah.
And I think that's it. Like that control where you control the things that, taking a shower, like, waking up at a certain time, having your coffee at a certain time. If you have to like get in report for something, just like get on it. Like, if you have like other chores that you need to complete, absolutely. I think that like idea of like controlling the little things is super valuable in like establishing that routine. The other thing you mentioned also is about kids, right? And that's the thing. I was reading this. I don't know if you saw this tweet. It's from like the Basecamp folks about, hey, their email service being delayed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was just yesterday or day before that they like added this thing saying, hey, because of all the things going on, like it is additionally stressful for our employees, so we're not going to do it. And the smart asses can say, oh well, you guys were working remote anyways, or like how's it a big difference for you, or like you're just trying to like make an excuse. But then it's only when I read the whole thing that I realized, oh wait a minute, it is different for people who are working from home. It's not the same. Just because you're used to working from home, that doesn't mean everything is the same as before.
Yeah,
we're in a freaking pandemic, right? And the things you mentioned, like your kids being like at home, that can just throw things off, right? Like it is so crazy because it isn't just your kids are not used to being at home the whole day, right? They're not used to being cooped up. I can only imagine like as adults, we feel so crazy just being stuck within four walls. I imagine like with kids, it's not going to be like smooth sailing, right? Like they're going to want to go out. They're going to got to eat, like even food, taking care of food, taking care of all of these things. Oh my God, it is truly, I feel people who think like, oh, this is fine, this isn't that like big a deal, just try to be a little more compassionate. I think if you add a little more empathy to what's going around and like what some of your colleagues have to go through, you'll realize like this is a very difficult period for multiple people. And this is like letting alone like the numerous people who are like under huge amounts of stress, who have been let go and who are facing so much difficulty, right? It's such a crazy time. So that aspect, like, things are changing even for people who are working from home, right?
Yeah. If you're caring for children, elderly people, or maybe even if you lost your job, what I say at that point in time is you're doing the pandemic on hard mode.
Right.
Because
that's a good way to put it.
The reason why the first week that my kids' school shut down, I tried to go about my life like normal. Like, all right, I'm going to do work at these times. I'm going to do normal stuff. That immediately fell apart. It was one of the most stressful weeks I've had in years. And then that Friday, I'm like, all right, I have to figure out a new normal. Like, I have to kind of readjust. And I'm like, what can I do to make this change? And then that's when I thought, I'm like, all right, what if I get up at 4 a.m, which is ridiculous. But all right, what if I do it? Okay, then I can get these 3.5 hours done. And then I'll have 5 hours of time with my kids for school and everything else. And I won't have to worry about it. And then I'll work from 1 p.m. till 5:30 or 6. I'm like, that'll give me my 8 hours. And I'm like, okay, I can make that work. And then, I might work out at 5:30 outside in the backyard while the kids are playing, catch or just goofing off in the backyard. I'm like, okay. And that's what I did for the next week. And that ended up working out for me. And now I'm kind of adjusting it a little bit more. All right, let me try working out at lunch instead. Maybe that will make me feel better. And a lot of it is actually asking yourself the questions and doing some introspection of saying, how do I feel right now? Like, all right, am I stressed out? Do I need to take a break? Do I need to go work out? Do I need to do whatever? And what a lot of this comes back to is also like, how companies are managing the remote culture. And a lot of this is out of your control too. So if your company can manage the remote culture in an autonomous fashion, then you're going to be much better off. And what I mean by autonomous is like, all right, here's the task that we need to get done. Here's the deadline we need to get them done. We're going to have a daily stand-up at 10:30 in the morning. Other than that, let's just communicate on Slack and get back to us when you can, but just let's hit our deadlines. If you could do that, that's great. But overall, for me to answer your original question is it's just about finding a schedule that works for you. And it's going to be different for everyone depending upon your factors. Do you have kids? Not have kids? When do you normally like to wake up? But if you can stick to that schedule, and that means showering at the same time, that means exercising at the same day. And here's the big one. That means stopping work at the same time every day.
That I think is like the big one. I want to, so a related question to that, right? When you typically tend to work, and like this is me asking the noob working from home questions, right? Do you tend to like work as though you were working like at, like at a company where you 9 to 5, this is your work mode and you just work the whole way? Or do you split it up saying, okay, for the next 3 hours, I'm going to work. Then I'm going to go finish like some housework if I have to, then come back and then like again punch out another 3 hours and then accumulate that? Or do you just go at it like in one full stretch where you're like, nope, 9 to 5, I need to like be productive, this is my productive time, knocking out all my work, everything else can wait, or like revolve around that? How do you handle that?
That's a fantastic question. So over the years, I have kept kind of a mental log, and then actually been keeping like a physical log of my circadian rhythm. And it's a very like biohacky method way of doing it. But what I have found is that I am very productive early in the morning. And so like, that's why I like to get up early. So I'm able to really get a lot of stuff done early in the morning. But here's the key. I need 3 hours or more. And this goes back to the Paul Graham, which we can link in the show notes, Paul Graham essay, was it Maker Schedule versus Manager Schedule, I think it's called? Yeah, so basically the synopsis, which I highly recommend everybody read this, who's an engineer and manager, read this article that we link. But the synopsis is like, look, if you're a maker, which is someone creative, like an engineer, designer, whatever, you need long stretches of time where you can get something done. So we're talking 2.5 to 4 hours minimum, blocks of time. And if you're being interrupted every 30 minutes, you're not going to get anything done, ever. Managers operate on the opposite schedule. They schedule their time in 30-minute increments to an hour increments and so forth. Since I'm an engineer, I need that chunk of time. So I get that chunk of time in the morning, and then I end up hitting the gym because it's just ended up what's worked for my schedule. Then at that point in time, in the early afternoon, I usually find myself handling like emails or whatever. And then the last 3 to 4 hours of the day, I'll bang out all client work, projects, etc. And then I have a hard stop usually. I put it as a range between 5 to 6 p.m. I put the stop. And then the reason why there's a range is because sometimes I'll almost get done with something and I just kind of need to push through the finish line, or I'll kind of be in a flow and I don't want to break that flow. But 6 p.m. is definitely the hard stop. But around 5 o'clock, I start evaluating it. And the big question is like, all right, well, when do I know when to stop at 5:27? That's a great question. If I'm in the middle of a debugging session, say I'm trying to get a unit test working and it's breaking and I'm Googling and I'm trying to figure something out, to me, that's an opportune time to stop. Because then what I'll do, I'll break in a broken, when something's broken. And that means tomorrow when I start up, I'll sometimes leave like a text note on my screen saying, all right, here's where I was at before. Here's what I was thinking. I'll just type a note up in the notes or text editor or VS Code, whatever you use, and I'll leave it active on the screen. And then tomorrow when I start my computer out or I just open the laptop or whatever, I'm like, oh, here's where I was at. I have a broken test. I have a broken screen or whatever. I can then hop right back into it. And a lot of times what that allows me to do too is allows the background processing of my brain to work overnight when I'm cooking dinner or when I'm taking a shower, or when I'm putting the kids to bed or whatever. And I wake up in the morning, I'm like, oh, I know how to fix that problem now. So it kind of has a double effect.
That's one of those things, again, that I've just learned with experience, because you always feel so tempted. You feel like the solution's at, like the tip of your fingertips. You're almost there. It's just right there, but it doesn't pan out. And this has happened at least like 10 or 20 times where I was forced for like different reasons, right? Like as I've grown, like different commitments, or I was dragged into something else. I've had to force myself. Like I don't have an option anymore. I'm not like the single dude like in a basement in my man cave where I can just go for the rest of my life.
Right.
That is like no longer an option. So oddly, I've noticed, and this is out of my control, I've had to stop. And then the next day when I come back, I was like, oh yeah, that's how it should be done, right? And obviously I'm thinking about it, like you said, like if, when I'm in the shower, or like if, I'm like driving, or if I'm like taking a walk, or I'm doing something else. It's so funny how the brain works, where subconsciously it is somehow working. And I come back and the next thing I know, I was like, oh my God, that's it. Like this other class that's there, that's what's causing the problem. Or, this technique, why didn't I think about it? You didn't think about it because your brain is like fooling you into thinking it can keep going, but it's like lacking all the oxygen or the whatever it is, and you need to stop, right? So fantastic point. This is again one of the, like, this is brilliant. I love that you mentioned that point. It's so important, and this is like one of those things I hope like people can carry over, where it's not just like the work from home thing, right? Like even if you're not working from home, or you don't have the luxury of working from home anymore, call it quits at a certain time. Like it helps you in more ways than you can imagine.
And I think that the thing that I want to harp on here a lot is like, just set yourself a schedule. And that means like if you tell yourself you're going to work out at noon every day, then you need to force yourself to work out at noon. When noon comes around, game over. You need to leave the computer. Same thing at 6 p.m. or 5 p.m. Whenever you say you're done with work, you need to be done with work at that period in time. Now, I don't care what you do with the rest of the evening. Maybe you're done working for your regular full-time commitment at job XYZ, and you want to learn, Go on your free time. That's the time when you stop working, you're writing Android, and you go learn Go. Like that's when you do that. Like if that's your hobby, or maybe you want to play piano or guitar or whatever. But you got to have those hard periods of times. And like if you notice, I've been very particular about my times. I say I wake up at 4, I take a shower at 8. Sometimes I work out at 9. Sometimes I work out at at noon. I work out at 4 or 5, and I quit at 6. Like these are like definite hard times, and they're there for a reason, because that's just the way that it works for my life. And if I leave it unended, and I've done this the last 2 days actually to test it, if I leave it unended, I'll just keep working.
Yeah.
And tonight,
I believe that. I believe that.
7:47 p.m. I look up and I'm like, I am still working on this piece of code. Like, what am I doing? Like, I need to stop. I'm going to burn out. Like, and I have to stop myself from doing that.
Right. So a couple of follow-up stuff from like the things you mentioned. One is it's Maker's Schedule versus Manager's Schedule by Paul Graham. Fantastic article. I'll throw that in the show notes. You mentioned like, somehow you leave empty notes as a reminder for the next day when you get back and you want to start working. Now, I actually do something similar, but what I do is I actually commit it. Git has this thing where you can write empty, you can allow empty commit messages. So I can post a command. So what I do is I actually commit, I write a git commit message stating like, okay, this is where I'm at, this is what's broken, and the next day when I come, I just like undo that commit, or like sometimes I don't even care, I just let the commit go, and it's almost like it's in Git, it's there, I don't have to worry about like anything else, I just finish it next day and return. So
how do you let that commit go? What do you mean by that?
So, I mean, if I have my project in a specific state, right, instead of fearing that, I don't want to commit it right now, and and leave a note so that my computer at work is like in the state where if say I'm like in the state where I need to fix certain things, and I want to and I'm writing a note to myself to fix these things. Instead of actually writing it as a note and keeping it somewhere else, I actually commit it into the code itself. So I write in the git commit message, I write like a note saying this is where I'm at. And, I think I tried this. These are the 4 ideas that I have to try and see if one of them will work. I just commit it. And so that's my note. I commit it into the repository. And if you, Git has this thing where you don't even need to actually have, if you try to commit a change, say you just, like git commit and message and you don't have any change, Git will complain saying it doesn't see a commit. But you can also add this tag called allow empty.
Oh, yes.
Git will just allow you to commit anything without like even there being a change. So it'll just show up in your log history.
Oh, so you're good question here. Do you push that to the remote, or you just leave it in your local repository?
I guess this depends on what you do. Typically, when I'm working on something, I never work off of master directly. So I'm working on my own branch. So I commit it and push it to my remote, but my branch on remote. So I honestly don't care, because eventually also when I merge, I squash merge.
Okay, squash.
So a lot of that goes away. So because of that, it doesn't matter as much what I have in terms of individual commits. But I'm usually very good about my commit messages. I'm not like one of those all my commit messages are just A, the alphabet A or B or C or D or like, J, K, L. I'm usually good about like each step, just because it's more for me than it is for anyone else. Because when I come back, because these days I also have to like context switch a lot.
Yeah.
So I'll just put all the information I know in my branch. I'll be working on 2 other branches if some hotfix or something urgent comes in. And then when I come back, it just helps jog my memory if I go through my logs. So that's one strategy that I use.
What, for the folks that aren't familiar with what squashing is, I mean, I know what it is, but what is squashing and why? What does it do?
So I mean, this you should definitely look at. If I'm speaking out of the best of memory, basically what it does is typically when you merge your branch, it'll keep every commit. So if you think of a tree with like multiple multiple sort of leaves, it'll like merge from that onto master. If you say squash merge, what it's basically doing is it merges all your commits, but it just squashes them into a single commit message.
Smashes them all together.
Yeah, it just like it emulates as though it's all just a single commit. And you might ask, well, I mean, why do you want to do this? It just cleans up your history sometimes. Like, so if you're only working on master, and imagine you have 20 people working, right? And each of them have branches and they all merge. When you look at the history, you'll start to see a huge number of commits, right? But if you squash merge that, what basically happens is you'll just basically see merge this branch. And then inside that commit, like if you actually git show that commit, you'll see like typically what Git does is when you're squash merging, it'll pick out all the single messages from your log history and put them all in that single commit message. So you can actually go through those commit messages that the author had in that.
Yeah.
Typically what happens if people are not diligent about every single commit message, when they're squashing, they'll just clean up all the other stuff and leave one nicely formatted log message saying feature X or feature Y or whatever it is.
Yeah. And there's been some companies that I've been at where it's a rule to squash each of your feature branches. And the reason for that is one of the reasons I have is like, look, each time we commit something into the master branch, that commit needs to build. And so
I see. Right.
So if I were to run, if it's Android, I need, Gradle W, assemble or whatever, it needs to be able to just finish successfully. Because there's many times when as developers, we'll be developing something, we're like, all right, I got this little piece of code working. It broke the rest of the app, but this little piece is working and I don't want to screw it up. So I'm going to commit this and then I'm going to continue on and then I'll fix the other stuff as I move on. And the companies I've been at have said, hey, like we don't want that in our commit history, so just squash your commits. So it's all just like you said, it's, hey, feature X is complete.
That's like a very good logical reason versus just like history aesthetics, right? One more thing. So you mentioned the time boxing thing, right? Like where you're like, if you need to be done by a certain time, if you're supposed to, learn how to play the guitar or like, learn Rust or Go at 7 p.m., you stick to the schedule. For you starting out, did you actually slot it out as I guess right now you're so used to this. So at this point, it's natural for you. Like when it's 6, automatically your brain is heading towards that, okay, 6 to 7 time to close, any time to close, right?
Yeah.
But starting out, did you do anything? Because that's the thing I noticed, like the first week of like working from home, my schedule was like crazy. I would just work until suddenly I realized, oh my God, it's like 9:30. I haven't eaten in the last like 6 hours. I've just been working straight. So did you time box yourself by adding like, calendar reminders or something along those lines? Or was it just...
At this point in time, I'm used to kind of looking at the clock and being aware where my day is at. So I'll kind of pay attention to it. There are times when it gets away from me, but that's rare. When I did start out and I didn't have children at the time, that definitely got away from me. And I think it's a normal thing for most people to encounter. And if you need to set a reminder or a daily calendar event, say, hey, in half an hour, you need to be wrapping this up. That's a good idea. It just some visual reminder of like, oh crap, it's 5:30 already. I'm supposed to be done at 6. Like, okay, I have half hour left. And this comes into the discipline thing. Like you have to turn this off.
Right.
Now,
and it's really hard. It's super hard. Like, it's harder than you would think.
It is. And here's why I'm telling you that you have to turn it off. Because I've been doing software long enough now where I have realized that once a quarter, there's going to be a hell week. And I think we've talked about this on the podcast before.
Oh, yeah.
And the hell week is a new release, a bug, something happens in the software on average once every 3 months where you're in the office for 80 to 100 hours that week.
Yeah.
That's hell week. And you don't know when it's going to happen. It just happens. And so if you don't have a particular regular schedule going on, every week's going to turn into hell week. And so if you're every week you're just working your 40, maybe 45 hours, whatever, if you're pushing it, boom, you're working a regular work-life balance. And then once a quarter, when that comes up and you got the 80 to 100 hour week, you're like, oh, I'm burned out. You're back to normal work at that point. So you have to be very disciplined about saying, all right, I'm going to be done at 6 p.m. Go off and go cook yourself dinner. Go out to dinner with your friends. I mean, not right now, but whenever all this clears up, go do your normal life stuff after work. Yeah, because otherwise it's just, and especially if you have, a significant other or whatever, like if you don't, before you know it, you're not going to be paying attention to them or living the life that you had before. So it's like you have to realize when this is something that's getting out of control. So if you can kind of time box everything, it's going to help.
For sure. So yeah, time boxing is one of those things that's really hard, but it will serve you well. It eventually just lands up being the right thing to do.
Exactly. So the question for you, man, there's this whole pandemic is just, there's a few businesses that have just skyrocketed in demand, and you happen to be in the middle of one of them.
Yes.
How are you handling the stress, the workload, and everything associated with, and for the folks who don't know, you work at Instacart, which is a grocery delivery service. How are you handling this? And if I don't know if you can talk to it, but like, how are you and your team handling the additional stress of working through this pandemic? Because at this point in time, not only you guys, I mean, I'd even say you guys are even more than essential. You're more than an essential service. Like, you're helping people stay alive. Like, your company's like more important than ever. And how are you guys doing that?
Our shoppers, who basically are the folks who go to the grocery store, buy the items, and then actually deliver it to the customers, to you and me, they're like, true heroes here, because they're really braving the risk. They're doing this, and making a living for their family at this time, while at the same time helping and making such a huge difference. So I'm extremely grateful I get to witness all of this. I will say this, our demand has grown crazy, and you can see this. Obviously I can't share precise numbers, but it has gone crazy. And obviously it is one of those times where you start to see what scale can really do, right? Things and we were a pretty big company to begin with, right? Especially these days, we're all over the US, we're in Canada as well. Scale is something that's crazy, where it just thrashes you, and within 2 to 3 days, because if folks remember the whole pandemic being announced and the shelter in place,
it was instantaneously. When
it came down, the axe came down fast, right? Within 1 day, governors all over were yep, you can't go out, only essential stuff, right? And also there's the fear, people don't understand what's happening, what is a healthy hygiene? None of this was available. So instantly, the scale that we had to deal with was pretty tricky. And a lot of our services, there were times where we had trouble with our backend services and the scale, and we noticed things that otherwise wouldn't be big issues. We had to work around the clock.
Yeah.
And this is one of those times where you can say, you know what, this is life, I'm going to work my 9 to 5, but also you tend to realize, given this context that I've given, there are people right now who are I can't get my groceries, right? Because of
I don't have food,
food, or I have a shopper who's shopping, and they're I'm looking to deliver this this big order from Costco, and extremely important thing to an old person who's waiting, right? Because of a bug that you have in the app. That tends to weigh really heavy. And so because of that, do you want to take advantage of this privileged position you're in to help and really work it? So it's been crazy, man. I'll tell you that. It is it is both exciting, but also scarily crazy because of like all the things that are going around, right? Like we don't even know how long this pandemic is going to last, right? We don't have a sense. It's going to, like they announced recently, it's going to be at least till the end of April at a bare minimum. And realistically, a lot of experts in the field are saying this is going to like go for longer. It is crazy. It is like super crazy. Anyway, sorry, that was a very long answer. And were there any like specific questions around that you wanted to like ask?
That's a good question. I mean, the scale thing is the interesting thing. I think when a lot of tech folks might find it interesting of like you said, you went from just kind of regular traffic to instantaneous, just like holy cow, overload. And I think what a lot of app devs, especially native app devs, don't realize is that like, okay, your app doesn't really suffer the consequences of that except for latency factors from the backend services.
So the funny thing is, and that's like the typical thing, right? Obviously, like in terms of working as a mobile developer, it doesn't matter as much, but there were instances where the scale grew so big that it started to matter, right?
Yeah.
We had certain features that we were piloting, right? That went like all in. Because it would help with a lot of these things, like where we have contactless delivery, or like we have abilities to like help shoppers deliver without like any contact. We were piloting these features, but they became crucial, right? And in some of these services, what happens is you hit the server. It's so funny because typically when you work and you deliver features, and this, right? As pragmatic engineers, sometimes you don't tend to think about scale as much, right? Because if you're a mobile engineer and you're like, yeah, this could be better, but this will work for now, right? If it's a big payload that you need to parse, like a huge JSON payload that you need to parse, doesn't matter that much, right?
At scale, though.
I ran into at least 2 situations where we had to push urgent fixes in the app because the app almost started like DDoSing our server, right? It ended up being effectively DDoSing our server because the scale is just like so massive. So as mobile developers, there's still like a huge sort of role you can play in helping with these things. Because in the end, you're hitting network requests, right? Any load you can do to intelligently help with that stuff, it like matters a lot.
It does.
And I mean, again, I can't part with numbers, but I can tell you some interesting sort of anecdotes that should like give folks an idea of like the scale, right? Instacart, like I think like on iOS and on Android, like we became one of the top, we were the 10th like most popular free app.
Yeah.
And that's, it may not be like a big thing, but
it's a big thing. I've been there. I know what it's like.
There were certain internal charts like in our like dashboard metrics where we had to change the y-axis.
Yes. Been there.
So it is extremely exciting, but also that's the kind of scale, and that can take you down really fast, and it's all like fun and glory when you see the numbers going up, but when things go wrong, that's that many thousands of people who are having a problem because of like, a bug that you introduced. So,
and it's funny, like this is what you're exactly explaining is the reason why this podcast exists. It's that talk that I gave about Android from the trenches at scale, everything from the scale, and that's the one you watched, and then like why you reached out to me and why we're on this podcast together today. And it's like now, it's funny what 5 years later, you're in that exact situation that I was in when I wrote that talk. And
right.
You're right. Like you will see things at scale that you had no idea. And at the time, this is I don't know, 6-7 years ago, when I was at Groupon, we're sending JSON down. And at the time, this is a long time ago, we were sending over 10 to 20,000 lines of JSON per request.
Right.
And so it's like a huge JSON payload that was like, would come down. And like you said, it was like killing the server. And so we had to like introduce some kind of like filtering and like almost like GraphQL like type of implementation to say, hey, I only need these 5 fields. And then instead of 10,000 lines, would get 500 lines of JSON of what I needed. And it would like reduce the load on the server and everything across the wire. And we weren't DDoSing anything. So same exact problems.
So many similar things, right? Like even if it's not related to our application, like logging, analytics, metrics, those things at a certain point, when you're working on a small feature, you're like, it'll be helpful like to have this like in the analytics. So like, you add analytics, or, even your logging. Because we've had so many shoppers and new like people joining the platform, some of these folks don't have like great devices. One of the devices internally we hate in like the
I'm waiting for it.
Android department.
I'm waiting for it.
There's like plenty of Samsung ones, but even like the Samsung ones, like there's this one specific LG device. It's called the LG Stylo 4. And to this day, I don't know. There's like a lot of people. I think it is a pretty cheap device, right? And like the funny thing we noticed is because we were like not like optimizing for like these small devices, we started to notice that like we would get a huge bunch of out of memory errors. And we weren't doing anything like necessarily wrong. We were just like handling a lot of data, right? Like with databases and stuff. And it's so crazy because at scale, all of this matters, right? And we have a lot of folks, like a lot of shoppers who, use like a second device or like have like this Android like cheap device that they use like for shopping. In all those cases, you have to like optimize for this, right? And it's so crazy how like we start to notice like things like that. And even like at scale, some of our third-party services, we started like hitting like the ceiling of those bills, right?
Yeah.
And then that starts to become really expensive, so it's all kinds of problems. So then you have to like dive into the client and see like, look, do you really need this, right? Either you like start to pay way more money in terms of like the bills you pay, and in many of these, like the way it works with big companies, right? You actually have contracts with a lot of these providers, and it isn't necessarily just about price, but it's also you have agreements because they have to host services, right? Like they have to use like an AWS or something in the background, and they only account for a certain amount of load. When you start to ramp their loads, you'll take their services down, right?
Yeah, I didn't think about that. That's crazy.
It's just so many sort of like related things that otherwise you would never think to worry about, that you have to really start worrying about now. So it is exhilarating, but also really scary in some ways. It's fun when like you're going up on the roller coaster and like you're taking down, but when you're starting to go through those loops, that's when like you start to get really queasy.
Go through the loops.
It's been a roller coaster. I think that's just the way to like sum it up.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I've used Instacart locally a couple of times, and the last time I was able to use it was about 2 weeks ago. Ever since then, I haven't been able to get a delivery time. Every time I check, there's just none left.
Yeah, it's been slammed. But I will tell you, my colleagues have been working like crazy. So now, typically in the mornings, if like folks check, you can probably get it in a week. And like even a week right now is crazy. Like it is insane that we're able to like manage to get it within a week, even now, given the demand. But yeah, I mean, it has been great. Typically, like, we try to get it within an hour or 2 hours, right? That's, but that's, I guess, what a pandemic can do.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, how busy it was. I remember when I first fired it up a few weeks ago, and it's like, I knew that the delivery window is usually 2 hours. I'm like, yeah, sure. And then like I ordered it, and I'm like, the time came that day, and I'm like, why isn't Instacart showing up? And I'm like, what's going on? And I checked the app, and I'm like, oh, it's for next Wednesday, not this Wednesday. I'm like, oh, I'm like, holy cow, it's like super crazy busy. But what I would like to say, and you've already said, is like I am super grateful for the folks that are going out there and doing the shopping and doing that. So it's I can't say thanks enough. And when I did use the app, I double, tripled my tip amount and everything. And like, it's just, it's an appreciation I show for the folks that are out there doing that for us.
You're a good man, sir. I did want, but I know like folks also have like other questions. So the most common one I think we're going to get is like, did you do anything to tweak your setup? You already have like a stellar working from home setup, so I don't imagine. But is there any tips you have along those lines?
Yeah, the one thing I recommend for this is all exercise related. Like get up and move once an hour at least. If you can, if you have like a mantle or a fireplace, walk over there, set your laptop there, stand up and work for a little while. Go for a walk around your neighborhood. A lot of people don't think about this, but like walking is one of the most underutilized exercises out there. Go for a walk. If you can, walk for an hour if you can. If you're able to. It's just going to help you overall. I know that you're probably not going to be able to order a standing desk right now. So kind of like make your own. If you have an end table somewhere, to be honest, for the first 3 years, my standing desk was an IKEA end table that I set my laptop on top of. On top of my desk.
Yeah. Do it yourself.
Yeah, that's what I did for 3 years. And it was easy for me to take it down and put it up to 20 seconds, if that. So do that, just you want to move around a lot, and if you can, and just don't sit there in one place all day, and get some sun, really. That's also something else I'd like to recommend.
What standing desk do you use right now?
I have two. When I'm normally at my office, which I do have an office outside of my house, I have an IKEA Vacant, which is kind of just cheap. It works. And then I have at my home, I have an autonomous AI desk. Which,
wow. That sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, which is actually really cheap. It's just one of the smaller ones, and it has memory settings on it. There's so many out there that you can use, but those are the ones I use.
Nice. Yeah, I have the Jarvis Bamboo. That's one I ordered some time back.
That's the one. That's the jam right there.
Yeah, I love this desk, especially now. Typically, I haven't used it as much, but these days I almost have it primarily in standing mode. Standing right now, yeah, and it's just, like you said, just the standing and sitting, especially when you're working from home, cooped up in a single room, like within four walls, it really helps to get that movement in there.
Yeah. And one of the other things too is if you're also standing, if you can, find like a chair or something that's, I don't know, 20 inches off the floor or more, and then put it next to you, and then put one foot up on it. Think of the guy from the Captain Morgan commercials who's standing on a barrel. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do.
Like stand like Captain Morgan, like that, and switch your feet every once in a while. What you'll notice is like you kind of like you relieve some pressure off of your hip flexors and everything when you do that, and switch to the other foot. Do the same thing to the other foot, and if you can, even get it up even higher. And a lot of times what I'll do is I'll just like really like I'll put something on top of a chair, like I don't know, something else, and really get my foot elevated high and just like get myself into a stretch while I'm standing there.
Stand like Morgan. That's it. Captain Morgan. That's the tip I'll remember.
Yeah.
You see, these are the kind of things like I've never thought. I did realize standing here, a lot of people have like a foot mat or something.
Yeah.
And I realized I left my foot mat at work, so I can go into work and get it now. But yeah, it's one of those things, right? If you have a yoga mat or something lying around, just something. And this is also a really good tip. I'll remember to do this. I didn't even think about this one, but yeah, just relieving some pressure of your hip flexors. Stand like Captain Morgan.
If you for the mats, I'm glad you brought that up. I actually use a special mat that I always forget about. It's called a ergo-driven topo mat, TOPO.
Oh.
And we'll add a link to the show notes for that. But it's ergo, so ERGO driven, DRIVEN, ergo-driven topo, TOPO, and it has it's like a anti-fatigue mat. You can stand on it, but in the middle, it's got like this little piece. If you stand there barefoot or with socks on or whatever, it has these ridges and like peaks and valleys on it on the corners where you can put yourself into like a quad stretch or like a you can massage the bottom of your foot with the peaks and valleys of the different parts of the ridges of the mat itself, or you can just stand on it flat. So it kind of gives you a bunch of different options, which is really nice.
Wow. Okay, that's good to know as well. Thank you for mentioning that. I'll add this in the show notes as well.
Yeah. Probably completely sold out right now, but hey.
Yeah, I know.
Everything is.
No, but I think this is just a good opportunity, right? I think more companies now are going to get into the habit of working from home, or at least feeling comfortable with having their employees work from home. And I think this is definitely one of those things that I think is going to become a practice, and a lot of people are going to realize how much more time they get with their family and can stay back.
Gosh, yeah.
That a lot of people are going to want to work from home. So I think these tips, even if right now may not be the best time to like get your setup up and going, it's good tips nevertheless.
This is kind of like being, you're jumping in with both feet. Like you have no choice but to adapt. And again, as I stated earlier, find yourself getting disciplined with time. Set some time that you're going to do something. If it's when you're going to quit, when you're going to work out, when you're going to wake up, when you're going to take a shower, when you're going to do all those things, set those times. It doesn't matter if it's setting a reminder on your calendar, on your computer, your phone, whatever. Do it and stick to it. There's going to be times when you feel like, I want to keep going. It happens to me every single day. I feel that way, like, oh my God, I want to keep going. But I have to tell myself to stop, because if I don't, one day is going to turn into 2 is going to turn into 4, and then before you know it, I'm burned out in a few weeks.
Oh, for sure. I believe that, yeah. Anyway, Don, I think we are coming to the end of this episode.
Definitely.
Thank you for your tips. I might keep bugging you as we go through our next episodes. I might throw in a question or here or there, just because I think a lot of folks are learning these new ways like me, and we'd love to hear more about that stuff.
Definitely. Yeah. If anyone has any questions, feel free to hit us up both on Twitter. If you have any questions about how to manage anything around remote working, if it's just time management, if it's mental capacity, if it's just mental health, anything, but feel free to reach out. I'll do the best I can to help.
And where can folks reach you at, Don?
The best way is either through Twitter or Instagram, same handle, just Don Felker with 2 N's. What about you, Kaushik? How can they get a hold of you?
I am Kaushik Gopal on Twitter, and that's usually the best way. Otherwise, my website is just kaush.co, and you can find a bunch of ways to reach me there.
Sounds good.
Thank you all so much for listening, and we will catch you in the next episode. I'd like to take this chance and thank the sponsor for this episode, educative.io. There are a lot of websites out there that offer programming courses, but educative.io has a really special text-based interface that helps folks learn faster and more efficiently. Check out the very new course they have for Android developers called Modern Android App Development. If you use the special link we have here, educative.io/fragmented, then you get an additional 10% off your purchase. So remember to use that special link. Once again, it's educative.io/fragmented. Thanks again for sponsoring the show. That's it for the show, folks. Fragmented is hosted by Don Felker and me, Kaushik Gopal. We edit and produce all the episodes here on Fragmented. Sarah the Amazing Jackson from the Spec Network helps with production assistance and wraps our final mix. Our theme and ad music is by the national recording artist Blueprint from Weightless Recordings. You can find more Fragmented episodes at fragmentedpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you in the next episode. 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 In the next episode.